what makes a movie nostalgic? You don't have to answer right away, I'll give you some time to think, but it's a bit of a hard question to answer. It requires us to really look inward and grapple with what parts of ourselves we long for in our past. Nostalgia is a wistful and sentimental yearning for a return to or of some past period or irrecoverable condition that we once experienced or lived through. It's not necessarily good or bad, it's a sense of memory. It's our memory. It lets us process that which we lived through, or it traps us in those times with sickly sweet serotonin, one of those too much of a good thing type poisons that'll really ferment your mind. Nostalgia is a term I think most people are intimately familiar with these days. It's no longer a word whispered in advertising agencies with stuffy, smoke-filled boardrooms. It's an arguably overutilized word to describe a constantly growing desire for a return to a simpler time. In an age of technological advancement like the 21st century, that kind of makes sense to a certain degree. A lot of people feel a monotony for the day-to-day life they lead. They long for that simpler time when happiness could come and be found in a 76-minute runtime for an animated film, when they had no worries and life seemed to twinkle brightly. Just like the Pumpkin King, who felt he lost his reason to give that skeletal smile, we too often seek an escape into that nostalgic past of what we feel we once had. It's all very poetic sounding, I know, and I get that, but I suppose that only makes sense when we're discussing a movie that revitalized a genre of film all due to the creative genius that spawned from a poem. But I suppose the real question actually here is, did it? Here, let me explain. Just as nostalgia is a look inward at our past, the question of ownership and creative control in artistic projects like film is an examination of how the accumulation of the past informs a piece. At what point we determine ownership can be a rather complicated question. Is it the first spark of creativity that determines who owns it, or is it the painstaking work that goes into the development, the blood, sweat, and tears that forges art and makes it belong to the artist? Or does art only become your own creative work when it's premiered in front of people? Is it that others viewed and were moved by it that makes it yours, the moment when that art becomes associated with you by others? What about collaborative efforts? What about art that builds on the Creative Commons? How much work do you need to do on a piece of art for you to gain some semblance of ownership? Can an artist even truly own their own work creatively if legally it's the property of a corporation? Is it then the business side of creativity that determines ownership, with backroom deals and contract negotiations all neatly dotting out a list of who owns what % of something so unquantifiable as artistic expression? Let me put it this way. Who owns Christmas? Is it the Christmas world with Santa that controls what Christmas is and is not and determines what people get to see and do and experience for Christmas? Does Jack and Halloween Town have a claim to Christmas as their own rendition, their own parody of Christmas? But is it even parody though? Such a genuine, earnest attempt at trying to create Christmas as a part of an escape from the fear of losing the joy of life that Jack holds such a nostalgic view of in the movie. Is that not still Christmas in its own way? Can Jack be told he did it wrong, or that he doesn't get to decide what is and is not Christmas? Or perhaps neither of the would-be artists of Christmas get to decide what is and isn't the jolly holiday. As we see, the people of the movie make the call and reject the artistic vision of Christmas that they were given by Jack. Perhaps then it's the consumer force of Christmas, all the good little kids tucked in with the sugar plum fairies dancing in their mind, that gives the seal of ownership and determines if they would accept such a nightmare for their Christmas. Anyway, I'm gonna talk about how wild 1993 was, so strap in. I'm really smart, and this is the nightmare of The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's 1993. The Cold War's over. Dinosaurs walk the earth once more. The Chicago Bulls just got a 3-peat win, and Tim Burton is one of the hottest directors around. Hit after hit, he knocks it out of the park with Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Batman, and Edward Scissorhands. Burton, in a 5-year stretch, had become a household bankable name in the star-studded world of Hollywood. But it wasn't always that way. In fact, for a long time, Tim Burton was bathed in the failure of his early work post-Cal Arts. He worked for the Mouse House in the dark ages of Disney, a period of time right after the passing of Walt Disney that almost bankrupted the studio and ended the idea of Disney forever, but that's a story for a different time. What's relevant is that the then fresh-faced Burton was part of an animation team responsible for such bombs as The Black Cauldron, often considered the worst movie Disney ever put out. Burton seemed to never quite fit in with the Disney brand. He did make some great short film work, however, his 1984 short film Frankenweenie did not impress Disney for its dark nature, which they felt didn't appeal to children, and the studio subsequently fired him. But the young Burton was not dissuaded of his artistic visions nor his dreams, however, and with a new connection in Hollywood of all those who had appreciated the real artistry of the admittedly odd spectacle that was Frankenweenie, Burton was asked to direct and adapt a feature of Pee-wee's Playhouse. And while not received well by critics, the oddball highlighting piece was a box office success, and a great reflection of the outcast permanent adolescent nostalgic themes Burton would become synonymous with in his early work. And so, Tim Burton's career was taking off. He went on to direct the previously mentioned projects of Beetlejuice, Batman, and so on, but there's a project that continued to come back to him, something he worked on whilst he was at Disney, a poem he had penned in 1982 as a little bit of parody of the famed Clement Clarke Moore's poem The Night Before Christmas. With all this success, Burton wanted to cash in and be able to bring this poem to life into a full-fledged story, but he ran into a snag that, well, Disney wouldn't give him the rights. You see, Burton wrote this poem while under contract for Disney, and so the film rights belonged to the mouse, no ifs, ands, or buts. But he did have a man on the inside, his friend and alumnus of CalArts, Henry Selick, who came up with Burton as a fellow animator at Disney, and so in July of 1991, Selick and Burton pitched the film, and away we go. Lights, camera, play sculptor? Let's get this stop motion moving. Lunch is in 10, the mouse wants his storyboards sent over pronto. Move it or lose it. Underlay, people, underlay. Time is money. Disney always gets its time. Places everybody. Quiet on set. Ready. Rolling. And action. Except, it was all very different at the start. The Nightmare Before Christmas was no Disney movie at all. It was instead slated to be a Touchstone Pictures feature film, and was all considered way too, quote, dark and scary for kids. Disney merely saw a chance to cash in on the successful career high Burton seemed to be having. But wait, Edward Scissorhands only released, 7 months before July of 91? And Batman Returns was already beginning pre-production for its 1992 release. How could Burton make a whole stop-motion animated feature film of famously time-consuming animation style when he was already so busy in the wrap-up and startup of directing the Batman sequel? Did Warner Brothers really not mind sharing their creative talent and splitting his time between the two studios? Well, I think you can tell from the title that this is all about to get a lot more interesting. Thesis statement time. We're halfway into this, but, no time like the present. I mean, who said a thesis statement has to come at the start? I mean, well, other than every English teacher I've ever had, but regardless, thesis. Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas is not Tim Burton's film. It was slaved over by the artistry of dozens of people, but ultimately it was directed by Henry Selick, who is the forgotten stepfather that actually made this movie. In fact, you probably don't even know who Selick is, but you surely know his movies, and you probably think they're Tim Burton's too. James the Giant Peach, Coraline, and most recently Wendell and Wild. Selick, as I'd mentioned, came up around the same time as Burton in Disney, but instead of getting fired, he'd been kept on and was approached by Burton to take on the task of bringing his poem to life in film. It wasn't a hard sell, and the two of them apparently operated on a similar creative wavelength, and so they kind of really hit it off. Burton would still produce this movie, and he'd stop in from time to time on breaks from Batman to discuss direction with Selick. However, it's clear that Selick was making this movie as his own story, and that's quite clear in the process of the making of this movie. I mean, bringing on Danny Elfman to write the songs and score the movie was his choice, finding and casting the actors, physically creating the shots by manipulating the figurines. Stop motion is, after all, a deeply intimate filmmaking process for a director, and that's understandable, as a shot of just 400 frames can take 10 days to shoot, and any mistakes during that 10 days ruins the shot, and it's back to square one. You need one cook in the kitchen for that, and we don't have to look very far to see Henry doing just that, putting his vision into the film.
Down, takes it up, looks, there's something in there, huh? Reaches inside, gets bit, and then fixes it on, and leans in just as they finish.
In fact, Henry's vision ultimately took the movie in a different direction. Tim Burton didn't even apparently want the fix-it ending of Santa setting things right, and instead wanted a much darker film. The final product, while approved by Tim Burton, has hardly anything to actually do with his direction. Henry Selick is the man behind the movie. So then you might be asking, why do you always think it's Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, when he was just a producer? I mean, a producer is usually a silent partner, and just a random name you see in a credit. Rarely do we associate a producer with a movie's success and artistic vision. So why do you think of it as Tim Burton's movie? Well, because it is. Or, well, rather, it was billed that way. In the lead up to the release, back when it was still being produced by Touchstone Pictures, The Nightmare Before Christmas was changed. It became a Disney proper release and had Tim Burton's name attached to the title of the film. It then became Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas as a selling feature, a not entirely uncommon tag to add for advertising a movie, though a bit overt compared to others. But you've certainly been in the movie theater watching the trailers, devouring all of your popcorn before the movie actually begins, or well, maybe that's just me, and you look up at the trailers and see taglines like "from the director of," or "the minds and creative team that brought you." All of these are easy punch-up trailer notes to drum up interest from people who recognize the brand of an actor or a director. Marketing is the name of the game in Hollywood, after all. But the crux of the issue here is that this movie isn't from the creative mind of Tim Burton, and that's not my own opinion. The title wasn't originally meant to be that way. Tim Burton's name was added in the home stretch of this multi-year movie-making process, a choice out of left field that Henry Selick didn't even know was going to happen. In November of 2022, Selick opened up about his misgivings regarding the titling of this movie in a Gizmodo interview, stating, quote, "It was unfair of them to change the name on me 3 weeks before the wide release. I would have been fine with that if that's what I'd signed up for, but Tim was in LA making 2 features while I directed that film. And I mean, Tim is a genius, or he certainly was in his most creative years. I always thought his story was perfect, but it was really me and my team of people who brought that to life." To summarize, The Nightmare Before Christmas was originally going to be through Touchstone Pictures because the studio believed the film would be too dark and scary for kids. They'd imagined it to be not unlike Burton's other work that they'd fired him for, so it was not to be a major Disney release. They were just trying to cash in on Burton's name. They didn't want to ruin the reputation of the Mouse House, and so the marketing was much more muted. But as Disney watched Selick work and became familiar with Selick's vision and idea for the movie, a far less dark movie than maybe Burton would have made, Disney decided to make this a wider release. But to have the wider appeal, they slapped on Tim Burton's name, and after a premiere of a modest hit in the box office, the movie went on to become a cult classic that millions enjoy every year. The result of all this, however, is that the movie became synonymous with Tim Burton's name, brand, and direction, despite Tim Burton not having truly worked on the movie and it being the very lack of Tim Burton's style that got the movie its wider release. Now wait, before we continue, I want to quickly touch on what I mean by saying Burton didn't truly work on the movie, because it's fair to say he consulted and produced Nightmare Before Christmas. He met with Henry Selick multiple times, and his advice and input were certainly taken into account for the movie's development. But as we discussed earlier, movies are a large and unwieldy thing at the best of times, and with stop motion, each and every decision needs approval, right down to how the body of each figure is going to move. It is a painstaking process that takes years of countless hours to bring to life, with dozens and dozens of highly specialized artists working together to bring life into the medium. It's not the sort of top-down rule by fiat production that requires little inputs here and there, and when you're already off working for a competing studio on one of their largest films of the new decade, with deadlines coming due and executives breathing down your neck, as Burton often described the process of making those films, you don't have time to also make a stop-motion movie. In fact, you can't, which is why Selick was the director in the first place. Tim Burton did not have the time to dedicate. What we see as Tim Burton's signature feel and style is certainly able to be found, though, in Nightmare Before Christmas. But I'd say you really have to start asking yourself, how much of that truly is Burton's signature style? Because when we look at what Selick would go on to do, you don't have to look much farther than Coraline to find the same whimsical, imaginative world, with themes of questing for identity, symbols of restriction and imprisonment in one's own life, even using a snow globe again to symbolize this feeling. Wonder where we've seen that before. Regardless of these 2 stop-motion movies that contemplate identity, self-actualization, the deceptive nature of appearances, power of imagination, and the use of a tunnel for escapism into a magical world that holds all you truly must want to fulfill yourself in life, until by the end of the movie you find that maybe staying in your lane and with your own life has its own benefits and happiness can be found right here at home. Yeah, regardless of all that, Selick's movies and worlds in his later work are far more reflective and complementary to the styles of Nightmare than Burton's own future stop-motion projects, right down to the art direction of characters themselves. These movies bleed Selick's handiwork in every breath they take. Heck, take any still from 2022's Wendell and Wild, and just try to tell me it doesn't reek like the crypt Nightmare Before Christmas was buried in. Now you might be wondering why I'm harping on these similarities, but my point is that despite the idea originating from Tim Burton's poem, Selick made this movie his own. The aesthetic and storytelling quality of Nightmare is a direct reflection of Henry Selick's burgeoning style as a director. When I said stop motion is an intimate form of movie making and animation technique, I meant it, because every frame is a sculpted vignette. Comedic timing, drama, sorrow, joy, every emotion you find in the movie is carefully crafted to occur, but with the director being ever more the actor than is typical of most movies. Animation already requires a director to be able to explain their vision clearly so that it can actually be executed. I mean, you can't rely on actors' improv or happenstance of a shot working out. It's all intentional, and especially so in stop motion animation. That's part of why it's so rare anyone would bother with this style of animation. It's a major time sink, and it's unforgiving as an art form. You would never make this kind of movie unless you were in love with it as a passion project, unless you loved it as your child. So imagine then for a moment that you not only dedicated all this time and effort and years of your life into a project only to find a living nightmare of your own where no one knows you did it, giving credit only to someone else, but that every other project you do afterwards is implicitly assumed by people to be the work of that other guy. The man that you called friend is now given credit for all the art you make, as if you never existed in the medium of film at all, to be left to always perform but never get applause. I think that would be a nightmare. Listen, let me put it another way. The Nightmare Before Christmas is Henry Selick's baby because it's his first feature film that he cut his teeth on. I mean, let that sink in. You don't have to be some film bro that fawns over Kubrick's every last thought to recognize how quintessential the idea of a director's first feature film is as a shining glimpse into their soul as an artist. The kind of film that comes around once and only once. For many directors, it's not their best work, but it's a labor of passion before any fame, before any notion of who they are or will be, before any burnout, before the reviews, before they have an image. It's the first budget that they were given, and the first time that they got to make something where they called the shots, the piece of work that was theirs. It's the universal symbol in that industry that, hey, you made it. You're making movies. Selick had been in the business since 1977. He was an in-betweener. That guy that makes the images that go in between keyframes in an animated movie, he was an in-betweener on Pete's Dragon. He would storyboard, tween, and go uncredited in some 16 movies before getting his shot at a feature film. And for 3 years, from 1990 to 1993, he was in charge. He was the captain. He would direct the ship that sailed Nightmare Before Christmas into port, a successful stop-motion film in the burgeoning age of CGI. And yet, the captain's name who charted this course would never make the papers. If a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, did you ever actually make a movie? Okay, so I've solved the case, right? I've set the record straight and now we all know who really made the iconic Nightmare Before Christmas. Case closed. Well, sort of. I want to go further with this. I want to briefly explore something that Henry Selick himself has even said, and that is, quote, now of course if you ask Danny Elfman, well, that's his movie. When we finished the film, it was so funny because he came up to me and shook my hand. Henry, you've done a wonderful job illustrating my songs, he said, and he was serious, and I loved it. And that's fine, but my thing was that I'm gonna hang in there long enough to where people will actually say, oh man, that guy Henry, he does stuff. You know, I think in a sense that quote summarizes why I wanted to make this video, but also why I wanted to address the idea of ownership, but also why that's difficult to do. Now, you might be wondering, why throw this spanner in the works? I had a nice, neat video that cleanly laid out that Mr. Henry Selick was the little guy that toiled away in the back rooms of animation studios and had had his shot at fame and glory, and it was quashed, taken away from him by the villainous Tim Burton. Well, because not only is it more complicated than all that, I wouldn't want to make it as simple as all that. Sometimes you can't paint with a broad brushstroke. You need to work on the finer details. At the start of all this, I asked you what makes a movie nostalgic, not just as a segue into discussing ownership, but because I believe these two things are inherently connected. All too often, we determine a sense of ownership based on our nostalgic feelings. For example, song covers. Naturally, we as a species tend to prefer the first iteration of something, like a song, that we encounter, even if that iteration is not truly the original version. It's a primacy effect, and that has a great many facets to it, and if you want to know more, I highly encourage you to read further into the study that I'm going to cite here, Donna or Don McLean, The Effect of Order of Exposure on Relative Liking, a study published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology in 2010. This study found, among other things, that perceived originality contributes to the preference for the first encountered stimulus. For our purposes here, though, I want to draw your attention to how influential this primacy effect is on our determination of a sense of ownership, and how that often connects into our sense of nostalgia. It's our tendency to assign a level of ownership to the artist we first encounter associated with a work. For example, you might think of the song It's My Life by No Doubt from the 2000s as a major hit for that band. But while a hit, it's not their own song. Many people alive during the 1980s would know that it's a cover of It's My Life by Tik Tok, and yet it consistently appears on lots of top 10 lists for Gwen Stefani or songs from the 2000s. What does that have to do with Nightmare Before Christmas, though? Well, I bring this up because Tim Burton's essence to a great many is tied to the idea of the wacky stop-motion clay figure films, like Nightmare Before Christmas, Coraline, and James and the Giant Peach, the latter two which Burton never worked on in any capacity. But nevertheless, there is this primacy effect based on how Nightmare was titled as Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas that ties Tim Burton to these films as a nostalgic lens filters our viewing of them. So much so that the top Google search results regarding Selick's post-Nightmare films are mostly inquiring if they are Burton's work. This nostalgia-fueled tether of Tim Burton is sentimentally and subconsciously perpetuated because of the primacy effect that occurred with his top billing. You might be asking yourself though, why do I characterize this as nostalgia? I characterize this connection with nostalgia because the nostalgia surrounding the film of Nightmare Before Christmas fuels the belief Tim Burton directed it in a feedback loop. Major companies that prey on nostalgia, like BuzzFeed and Collider, that publish those articles trying to snatch a quick ad buck with their serotonin IV drip that deliver that wistful nostalgia by the gallon, continuously and wrongfully credit Burton with Nightmare in every top 10 list. And even when some publications do note in the tiniest of fonts that Tim Burton didn't direct the movie, it's begrudging, it's placating statements like, "We're cheating a little bit here as Tim Burton did not actually direct the movie," omitting the little detail that Burton wasn't even on set for the majority of its creation. Don't get me wrong, ownership and art are a tricky thing, not just because money is involved in the industry of movies, though that certainly doesn't make it any easier, but rather ownership is difficult because movies aren't made by one or two people. I mean, what made Indiana Jones work? Was it Harrison Ford's charisma, George Lucas's writing, Steven Spielberg's direction? Or maybe it was something more obscure, like Michael Kahn's editing. I mean, he edited Close Encounters, E.T., Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan. I bet you've never even heard of him, and yet he's clearly been a linchpin in much of Steven Spielberg's work. It might not sound glamorous, but editing makes or breaks a movie more often than not. For proof of that, look no further than the work of the aforementioned writer George Lucas. Star Wars: A New Hope was famously saved in the edit by Marsha Lucas, saved to the point that every actor who'd worked on that movie thought it'd bomb until the edit salvaged the whole thing. So how do you determine who gets what amount of credit from that movie, and who owns the artistry of that movie? Well, while you think on that, the real kicker here is that I didn't even mention John Williams' score for Indiana Jones, so where does that piece of the pie go? What does music bring to a movie? Well, like Selick said, in Danny Elfman's mind, The Nightmare Before Christmas is his movie. Danny Elfman is even that silky skeleton song-singing sound you're so used to hearing, having sung all the parts for Jack Skellington, though he was only the vocal voice for the songs, as Chris Sarandon is the actor who voiced all the spoken lines for Jack. A change that actually caused quite a rift amongst the creatives working on the film, as Elfman was very, very unhappy about that change, but that's a different tale. But what does it all mean? What does it mean to create and find yourself collaborating on artistic work? Can there really be a sense of ownership of the art? Well, often in the case of movies, as complicated as I've certainly made it seem to be, we determine ownership in a few key ways. Typically, the director is viewed as the movie's creator, the creative that made the movie. Even when fairly hands-off, the director is deemed the sum of all the parts and the king of the movie. They pulled the sword from the stone, light shone upon them, and bada bing bada boom, they brought life and goodness into Avalon and Camelot once more. Okay, that's a bit much, but you get my point. The director is deemed the owner of the film, as they own the creative vision. They direct all the departments, they get the project started, they have their hand in a little bit of everything. Now, that statement can certainly be challenged, but most would agree the director is what makes or breaks a movie. Great performances can be found in bad movies, and great costume design or stunt work, great scores, but at the end of the day, the movie is the sum of all these parts. And bringing that together into one single vision, well, that's the director's job. They get everything going in the same direction. I mean, jokes aside, this doesn't always ring true. Certainly, there's writing and story for some movies that's far surpassing the director's direction that made that movie work. Or there's acting performances that really are only attributable to the actor that performed them. For every 2001: A Space Odyssey, there's always going to be a legend. So yeah, maybe there are times where the director is more of an impediment to the film than a benefit, or should at least have less of a claim to the creative vision for that film. These instances occur. I mean, that's what happens when you collaborate. Movies are, after all, a mix of all the people that worked on them's input and ideas, the sum of all their parts. That's why there is triumphant Oscar gold to go around, with each category, at least visually speaking, getting the very same trophy. So then why am I so focused on Nightmare Before Christmas? Why have I made this whole video if movies are always a mix of people's efforts? Maybe Selick is just a cog in this machine and doesn't need or deserve greater recognition for the success and artistry of this film. Surely the animators who worked tirelessly for days and weeks on end just to get one shot completed deserve their praises sung too, right? Well, I guess it's not that the credit shouldn't be given to more people in making this movie, it's rather that the most credit has gone to the least deserving. I think what expresses why I wanted to make this video best is probably what Selick himself said about his experience and credit for his work. Selick's not a diva director demanding praise, and he isn't against collaborating, or even collaborating with a bigger name, and in fact, he has done just that with his last 2 films. But as Selick says, Coraline is based on a really good book by Neil Gaiman. That didn't hurt. On Wendell and Wild, my collaborator is Jordan Peele, and that's the reason why we were able to set this up. So I really, truly like to collaborate, but I'm the one leading the teams to make these movies, and neither Gaiman nor Peele put their name above the title of the movie. What's in a name? If you're a Shakespeare buff, or maybe even took drama class in freshman year, I'd expect you to answer, that which we call a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. The idea being that for Juliet, in comparing Romeo to a rose, she proposes that he'd still be her love, even if he hadn't been named Romeo, if he bore any other name, was given any other name, was saved from being born a Montague. Juliet would love him all the same. As a rose, he'd smell just as sweet. It would even be so that Romeo would be easier to love if not for the name of Montague. She could love him still and love him freely. His essence is still that of Romeo, and the name that marks him shall be ever more immaterial. Does a rose not, by any other name, still smell just as sweet? Perhaps it does. And perhaps Shakespeare and in turn Juliet are right in this assessment, and Romeo does not need to be Romeo Montague for Juliet Capulet to love him. But while a lovely sentiment and philosophical thought, it doesn't change the fact that he is Romeo Montague, and all the complications that come along with that name make up the life he leads, and the antagonistic issues we see within that very play. When asking what's in a name, it's just as worthwhile to consider the power and importance of names. We are our names, and our names are us. According to Dale Carnegie, a 20th century author famed for his work, a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. The sound of someone using your name typically cuts through all other noise that might be going on around you. Since birth, you have been conditioned to respond to the sound of your name. Just as in myth and legend, names are powerful tools in our lives with the ability to influence and control. The use of names conjures all manner of thoughts and feelings in our day-to-day lives. The idea of true names, after all, are considered a form of sacred language that can be found referenced in philosophy, religion, magic, and folklore. So, what's in a name? Arguably everything. Arguably nothing. It's complicated. The creation of this movie is, without a doubt, an absolute labor of love. Every frame, every movement, every note in a song, all are carefully placed, scripted, and designed to bring life to that which is dead, to see a skeleton grin shine once more. When I started making this video, I wasn't entirely sure what I'd end up doing with it. Is it a commentary on nostalgic pursuit, highlighting how the movie itself is an allegory for competing ownership of an artistic vision? Is it a deep dive into the business side of Hollywood, examining how studios abuse artistic passion for corporate profit? Is it a takedown of Tim Burton? Am I trying to slander his name as a director and take credit from him that was not his to be accredited with? I don't know. All of it? None of it? This conversation is a complicated one. I don't think Tim Burton had no influence on The Nightmare Before Christmas. I think his poem remains the heart of the project, and his ideas are certainly able to be found sprinkled throughout the film. Some of his ideas are at its very core. It was never a one-man show. Selick, Burton, Elfman, heck, Pete Kozacek, Carolyn Thompson, Michael McDowell. None of them have full creative ownership over this movie. But perhaps that's the point. It's not that Tim Burton could have never made this movie himself, or that stylistically the choices would have been totally different from Selick's. You can look at Burton's early work and see the through line to that special kind of weird that Nightmare is, or look at Corpse Bride, made 12 years later. Though he didn't actually fully direct that one either. Like I'd said, Selick and Burton found kindred spirits in one another. At least, for a time. But it needs to be noted that his role in this film, it's so overblown that it stripped recognition from the other artists. That his credit in this title of the film robbed Selick, not just of the credit for his movie, but of credit for his future movies as well. What's in a name? The ownership, accreditation, and fruits of your labor. Life, liberty, and property. I don't think Tim Burton should have been entirely smudged from the record of Nightmare Before Christmas's making. Rather, I just think he needs to be put there with an asterisk beside his name. Tim Burton presents Henry Selick's Nightmare Before Christmas. Good night.